Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Jutip. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. If it is coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center via one of these feeds, we're going to bring it to you live right here. This is CBS News 24/7. President Biden announces a series of major reforms to the Supreme Court, details on the changes, and the changes he's calling for, and if any of them can actually happen. A political standoff in Venezuela. Both sides are claiming victory in a presidential election the U.S. has called concerning. And several wildfires have exploded in parts of the western United States. We'll have a closer look at the dangerous conditions and the efforts to fight the flames. But we begin this morning with the President of the United States calling for major reforms to the highest court in the land. The administration is trying to address the growing ethics concerns that have surrounded the high court in recent months. The president is set to propose term limits for justices and an enforceable code of conduct. The administration is also proposing a constitutional amendment that dictates that there is no immunity for crimes the former president committed while in office. All right, so to break this all down for us, let me bring in CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes to break it all down for us. So, Nancy, the president sort of teased this a few days ago. This is a substantial proposal for an outgoing president who many might consider a lame duck. Why is he proposing this now? And what are the chances that he can get any of this done in the next 99 days?
He is bringing it up now, Vlad, because he knows that it is popular with the progressive base. It's something that he promised to take a look at. Highly unlikely that he could push this through a divided Congress sometime in the next 99 days. In fact, even if his vice president, Kamala Harris, is victorious in November, it's going to be very difficult for her. Nonetheless, they don't mind the contrast that gets created here. If President Biden is out there on the road pushing for more guardrails when it comes to the Supreme Court, they argue that if the Republican opponents are out there pushing back, then it might look like they are arguing in favor of unethical behavior on the nation's highest court. So they're happy to have that fight, even if the policy at the end of the day doesn't go anywhere anytime soon.
So it's interesting, Nancy, and maybe you can explain to our viewers. So the Republicans are seeking to paint Vice President Harris with the same broad strokes that they're painting the President of the United States. In other words, it's the Biden-Harris administration. So everything up until the moment that she announced her candidacy for the presidency, you can tie to both of them. What about in situations like this? Does the Vice President have to be out on the campaign trail in support of whatever President Biden is doing in the next 99 days? Or can she start to distance herself? Not to suggest that she wouldn't be in lockstep with most of what President Biden is doing, but to sort of carve her own path.
I think she has to be a little bit careful. She is, after all, still his vice president, but you have already seen her kind of inching her way into her own territory. For example, when it came to her meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel the other day, she was much more forceful about the humanitarian situation in Gaza than President Biden had been after his meeting with Netanyahu. So you could really see her kind of staking out that territory. Again, territory that is very important with the progressives in their party. Historically, vice presidents have to hew very close to where the president is at, but there are times when you've got a lame duck president and a vice president running for to succeed him or her. Just think about Clinton when Al Gore, his vice president, was running for office. Those can be tricky situations to navigate, but there's no question that a vice president in that situation is going to have to try to find their own path that they think is going to be successful with voters.
Yeah, and I was specifically thinking about her meeting and her statement and comments afterwards with Bibi Netanyahu. Nancy Cordes for us at the White House. Nancy, as always, we appreciate you. Thank you.
You got it.
All right, Iowa's strict new abortion ban goes into effect today. It bans most abortions after about 6 weeks of pregnancy once cardiac activity is detected. That is before a lot of women even know that they are pregnant. Now, there are some exceptions in some cases for rape, incest, fetal abnormalities, and to protect the life of the mother. Iowa joins more than 24 states where abortion access has been restricted in the 2 years since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. Other big news we're tracking this morning, wildfires raging across the western U.S. and California. Crews are facing some new challenges as they race to extinguish flames from the Park Fire. It is now the 7th largest in the state's history. CBS News correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti has been in Chico, California all weekend long. And Jonathan, what have officials been telling you about how massive this fire is and the efforts to contain them?
Yeah, this is explosive. You have a little bit of a preview of what the rest of the 360,000 acres looks like here. We're talking an area around the size of the city of Los Angeles. Earlier this morning for CBS Mornings, we were actually on the front line of this firefight. Fire crews, about 100 of them, working to hold back flames, some of them more than 100 feet reaching into the sky. Those crews successful in that moment, but the fire continues to burn. 12% contained, but wind has been a big issue here. The Park Fire started back on Wednesday, quickly exploded to becoming one of the largest in state history. 10,000 people currently under a mandatory evacuation. 60-plus structures, many of them homes, were destroyed by this fire. The fire, we are told by officials, was intentionally set by a man who allegedly lit his car on fire and pushed it into a ravine. But climate change has played a role in just how explosive it has become. We're talking extreme winter rain, which led to the rapid regrowth of vegetation, and then extreme summer heat, which led to the drying out of all of that vegetation. Perfect fuel for fire. That suspect is now in police custody. He will be arraigned later on today. Meanwhile, the firefight continues. There was a break in the wind and in the weather over the weekend, allowing that 12% containment, but the firefight still very much active. 4,000 firefighters here on the scene, and we're told hundreds more are being brought in for backup, Vlad.
Wow, the fight goes on. Jonathan Vigliotti for us in Chico. Thank you, Jonathan. All right, let us bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast. Grant.
Hey, good morning, Vlad. Happy Monday, guys. Starting off our Monday morning, tracking a lot of the smoke out on the west. It's not just the fires, but it's the smoke that's spreading to the northeast. That's really going to be a big issue. It's been a big issue, obviously, but that will continue. Several air quality alerts in effect through portions of Idaho, back into Oregon, even Washington, seeing some of that smoke drift into the air, reducing that air quality. Look at this. It shows you where the smoke is being blown by the winds, not just at the surface, but in the upper levels, as that smoke will then move up towards the northern tier states and then continue into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes states as we head through the next couple of days. So air quality concerns will continue even into the Ohio Valley potentially later on this week, with that smoke continuing to the east. Meanwhile, today across the northern tier states, we've got a concern for severe weather across the northern tier from North Dakota into western Minnesota, all the way down through the Ohio Valley into portions of the Appalachians, watching for showers and some intense heat. We'll talk a lot more about this throughout the next hour, but very humid conditions across the Central Plains into the mid-Mississippi Valley, where feels like temperatures over the next several days will be in the triple digits. Vlad, we'll get to that in just a bit. Back to you.
All right, Grant, thanks so much. We're following some breaking news out of the UK where police say a man has stabbed several people. They are calling this a major incident. This is happening in Southport, which is just north of Liverpool. So let's bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ian Lee with a breakdown of exactly what is going on there. So what happened, Ian?
Hi, Vlad. Yeah, we're hearing all the emergency services in the region are involved in this response. And what we know so far is just before noon, reports came in of a man attacking people with a knife. The local ambulance service says they've treated at least 8 victims with stab wounds. One eyewitness described the scene as like something out of a horror movie. A number of victims are believed to be children. A local journalist described seeing one girl on a stretcher covered in blood. Police armed with guns responded to the incident and say they've detained a man and that a knife was also seized, while adding that there isn't any wider risk to the public. A local children's hospital that is treating some of the patients has declared this a major incident and is telling parents to only bring their kids in if it's urgent, as their emergency department is extremely busy. This was the beginning of the summer break for many school children across the UK. They were out in the area enjoying the warm weather when the attack occurred. A parent is telling local media that her daughter was at the scene and was able to run away to safety, and that she is traumatized by the attack. Vlad?
All right, Ian, thanks so much. I know you're going to stay on top of this story for us. We appreciate you coming up. Let's toss to the BBC. They are covering what police are calling this major incident after the reports of a stabbing in Southport, England. Let's listen in.
Liverpool. They deployed armed officers to the scene. A man was detained and a knife was seized at the scene. But the Northwest Ambulance Service, the local ambulance service, says that it dealt with 8 people with stab injuries at the scene, having deployed those 13 ambulances and an air ambulance, and also these merit doctors that specialise in dealing with mass casualty incidents. And perhaps most disturbingly, what Northwest Ambulance Service said was that among the hospitals that they had taken casualties to is the world-famous Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool. So we know that a number of the people who were injured in this incident were in fact children. We've not heard anything about fatalities at this stage, but we believe there are likely to be fatalities.
And there were reports on the scene from eyewitnesses who talked about a number of children. What we don't know, and we're waiting still for updates, is any real confirmation. We know a total figure of 8, but very little other detail than that.
That's right. I mean, I think that, the ambulance service, at the time they put out their statement, an hour and a half after the incident, will have been up to date, which will have been 8 people treated at the scene for stab injuries. What we don't know was whether that number has gone up. And as I say, there's no official fatality figure at this stage, but we are fearing the worst about fatalities, and as well as the Prime Minister having issued a statement saying that he's been kept informed about what's going on. We've also heard from the Home Secretary, the UK Interior Minister in effect, who spoke to the House of Commons just a few minutes ago.
All right, you've been listening to our partners at the BBC who are all over this story of what police are calling a major incident after the reports of a stabbing in Southport, England. So far, it doesn't appear, at least according to the anchor that you just heard there, that there have been any reported injuries, but obviously we're going to stay on top of this story. If there is news, we're going to bring it to you right here on CBS News 24. Let's stay overseas and go to Venezuela, where a tumultuous presidential election could also have major implications for the United States. Authoritarian President Nicolas Maduro is claiming victory in the country's election after his main rival was barred from running, but the opposition is rejecting the election results and also claiming victory. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano joins me now from Caracas to talk about this. So just explain to our audience, Lilia, who's perhaps not following what's happening in Venezuela, what exactly happened after this election was finished, and why this has implications for those of us here in the United States.
I mean, and I can't do the crash course of leading up to now, why people don't trust the results of the election, but I'll say this: Venezuelans have been here before. The 2018 election was considered illegitimate by many people. I think I'm having some of the audio issues. I'm hearing the control room, so I hope they're not hearing it too. But basically, Vlad, the last election was something that people didn't trust. The United States, under the Trump administration back then, considered the results of the election illegitimate, and so did many other countries. That said, this time there was the biggest gap in the polls leading up to this day, yesterday of the election. People trusted that things could have changed. In terms of the stakes for the United States, you have to understand Venezuela is the country with the largest oil reserves anywhere in the world. It used to be one of the richest countries in the hemisphere. And now it's the country where the biggest migration, human mobility crisis in our hemisphere in modern history has taken place. Almost 8 million Venezuelans have left. Why? Because the economy completely collapsed, basically. The GDP dropped by just record level numbers. Inflation was soaring a few years ago. And because of the policies of this regime, the U.S. the U.S. government recently placed sanctions on this country, which furthers the need, according to the government, that exists here. People here are telling me that they're that their wage for a whole month for a public worker is something like $7. Some will make, $70, but their expenses, because the economy is now dollarized, are incredibly high. So they just can't make ends meet. We've heard from a lot of people, and this is what the opposition has been telling us. This is an election that has a lot to do with migration. We've heard from people who said, we stayed here to vote. And if Maduro retains power, we are ready to leave. Most of the ones we've heard from trying to get to the United States. So those are the direct implications to the United States and to other countries in the region where migrants go too.
All right, Lilia, who's been covering the story. In fact, you are the only major broadcast network correspondent covering this election in the United States. In other words, you are the one network reporter who has gone out there to give us the breakdown of what's going on. We so appreciate it as always, Lilia. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Vlad.
All right, let's talk about the Olympics. Team USA dominating during the opening weekend. We're going to have a full recap, plus why there are some new concerns this morning about the water quality of the River Seine. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Israel has vowed a significant response to the deadly bombing in the Golan Heights over the weekend. A rocket hit a soccer field, killing about a dozen people. Israel blames Hezbollah for the attack. The Iran-backed militant group has denied it. Funerals for those killed were held yesterday. Israel and Hezbollah have traded rocket fire since the beginning of the war in Gaza. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayeb is in Beirut. So, Imtiaz, how has the weekend bombing been a tipping point between what has been sort of a low-intensity, under-the-radar battle between Israel and Hezbollah?
Vlad, good to be with you. Yeah, it's really interesting that we describe what's been going on Israel's northern border and Lebanon's southern border in those ways, and many people do. But when you really look at the numbers, Vlad, since October the 8th, the day after that horrific attack carried out by Hamas, up until the 5th of July, we've seen 7,491 cross-border attacks between Hezbollah and Israel. 7,491, disproportionately from Israel. Still, to give you a sense of the destruction that it's caused, in southern Lebanon, we have basically seen villages pretty much reduced to ruins. Around 90,000 people have been displaced from their homes, and over 100 people have been killed. And we also understand around 350 Hezbollah fighters have been killed. In northern Israel, we've also seen around 60,000 people displaced from their homes, dozens of people killed, and of course, Israeli soldiers killed in the fighting. And then that deadly attack just this weekend, in which 12 people, 10 of them under the age of 15, were killed in that strike in the Golan Heights, which is controlled by Israel. And many believe that this is going to be that major tipping point. Israel saying that it is going to carry out strikes here in Lebanon that are going to, quote, hurt. But there's a huge amount of pressure on Israel not to carry out strikes so intense that Hezbollah will have to respond in a way which could see an all-out war. But
that is the fear, Imtiaz. And so a couple of questions. We know that Israel is capable in terms of its military and its military weaponry, which is supplied by the United States, of fighting two full wars at the same time. On the other hand, the question is, what does it mean for the wider region and for the United States? In other words, Hezbollah is backed by Iran. Hezbollah is not Hamas. It is a major military power in its own right. And what implications does that have for the United States?
Vlad, that's such an important and astute question. The reality is that what we've seen over the last nearly 10 months in Gaza, the devastation there, and indeed that fighting, which is still going on between Israel and Hamas, if we see that fight move here, it will be vastly different. As you rightly point out, Hezbollah is backed by Iran, but Hezbollah is its own potent fighting force. It's been around since the 80s. It has fought wars with Israel before, has pushed Israel out of its territory, and indeed was able to push Israel out of Lebanon in 2006, which was the last major war that these two powers fought with each other. But there's a crucial difference here, Vlad. Hezbollah was supporting Bashar al-Assad in neighboring Syria during that brutal civil war in which 500,000 Syrians were killed in fighting, much of it led by Bashar al-Assad. Hezbollah learned how to fight. It has a much wider arsenal than it ever had before. And so for it to engage in an all-out war with Israel, it would be able to carry attacks inside Israel in a way that we've never seen before. And that is something that worries the U.S. and indeed the world. Vlad.
Incredibly troubling. Imtiaz for us. Thank you. Reporting from Beirut, Lebanon. Appreciate it. All right. Let's talk about what's happening in France, where officials say multiple telecommunication lines have been hit by acts of vandalism as the country hosts the 2024 Olympic Games. Let's talk about the games themselves. Over the weekend, Simone Biles made her highly anticipated return to the games, dominating a qualifying session that ended with Team USA in the lead. CBS News Saturday morning co-host and CBS News sports correspondent Dana Jacobson is joining us from Paris. Dana, you are outside Team USA house. What is the energy like? I mean, yesterday's qualifications for the gymnastics competition was electrifying. We were all watching at home.
Yeah, didn't we all just let like a sigh of relief out when we finally saw Simone in that first event? It was incredible. It's been incredible so far. You mentioned Team USA house behind me. This place is incredible. So it's a gathering spot. It's athletes, it's sponsors, it's even fans this year that can buy a ticket to come in to get a little piece of the U.S. here. But here's the cool part, Vlad, that I love. We obviously are in a Parisian square. So all around the USA, we are basically in Paris. Even a brasserie over here where I'm going to guess we might hang out a little bit later, after a few more live shots. Either way, it's absolutely what they want for these Olympics. The idea is that you are bringing the world together, a little piece of America here in Paris for the athletes to go. We're actually going to be in there later talking to one of the newest medalists, silver medalists for individual foil, Lauren Scruggs. I can't get that right. It's just fencing is how you probably know it. But she took home silver, the first ever American black woman to win a medal in that event. And Americans actually took 1 and 2 in that, Vlad.
Yeah, Dana, I mean, this is not your first Olympics and covering for CBS News. And so I'm just curious from just your own standpoint, what's it like to be back? I mean, I know that, it's funny because in the years and months leading up to Olympics, I think all of us are like, oh, ho-hum, it's the Olympics. But then when it starts, you're just immediately, I mean, we're watching, it's not just the big sports. We're not just watching judo, swimming, and gymnastics. I swear to you, we were watching handball, dressage, and table tennis this weekend.
Of course, I was doing the same thing. The hard part here is I'm trying to find it on the French channels so that I can find. Last night, we had to put up a computer so that we could watch the U.S. women's soccer team because it wasn't on the channels because the French team was playing. But that's exactly it, Vlad. You sort of say, whatever, and you get excited. There really is national pride from every country here and just a very friendly feeling, even between nations that are competing at the highest level. I haven't seen some of the pin trading yet, but as we start through the next couple days, seeing people in some of these events, we were earlier by the Arc de Triomphe. It's incredible that you're in this background, in this backdrop for the premier sporting event that people get to take in.
I love it. Dana Jacobson, hopefully we'll be able to check in with you all week long and all throughout the Olympics. We appreciate you coming up for us. Thanks, Dana. And now go get yourself have a glass of wine, a steak tartare.
A little more work to do, Vlad.
We'll talk to you later. Thanks, Dana.
See ya.
All right, let's talk about weather now. We're keeping a disturbance out in the Atlantic Ocean that could form into the next tropical storm or depression. The latest projection just ahead. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. You're looking at live pictures out of Houston, Texas, where Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is lying in state today in Houston City Hall. She died earlier this month after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. President Biden will travel there to pay his respects later today, and Vice President Harris will be there later this week. We're getting a look at the extraordinary destruction left behind in a Canadian resort town after a wildfire tore through the area. These are homes and buildings that were reduced to ash in Jasper. Officials say some 25,000 people were evacuated and hundreds of structures were destroyed. Deadpool and Wolverine made box office history as the highest ever debut for an R-rated movie. The highly anticipated Marvel film starring Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman raked in $205 million in domestic sales in its opening weekend. Twisters, the weather disaster thriller, dropped to number 2 in its second weekend. Despicable Me 4 rounds out the top 3. Now to the race for the White House. With just 99 days to go until Election Day, both Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump were on the campaign trail over the weekend. A recent poll from ABC News says over the last week, the vice president saw a boost in her favorability while Trump saw a decline. Speaking of former President Donald Trump, over the weekend, the Republican nominee went after Harris in a series of personal attacks. It comes after the former president made an unusual plea to Christian voters on Friday. We have team coverage following the campaign trails all across the U.S. Campaign reporter Shauna Mizell is in Louisville, Kentucky, following potential Harris running mate Governor Andy Beshear. We'll begin with her. Shauna, you're at an event with the governor. What are you hearing from his camp? Has he been, the question, of course, to everyone who is potentially a vice presidential pick, have they been asked by the campaign to submit any paperwork?
Hey, Vlad, good morning. That's absolutely right. I'm at this event with Governor Beshear for the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And here today, Beshear really did not get into the political waters. He sought to, really present himself as a governor and just talk about veterans and all of the work that they've done. But over the weekend, he did respond to a lot of those attacks that Trump lobbed at Harris. In fact, when Trump called Harris a bum, Beshear said that Trump should actually look in the mirror and he will see a bum himself with convictions. But Beshear has not really said whether or not he's been asked by the Harris campaign to submit vetting materials.
And so, Shauna, how the campaign, the vice presidential campaign has to choose, the nominee has to choose somebody for the vice presidential slot before, for example, in Ohio, where August 7th is the deadline to be on the ballot. Has the campaign or even Governor Beshear indicated that there is some kind of a deadline that they have to hit before they make that decision?
Governor Beshear has not, but we had Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who is very close with the Biden campaign, on CBS this morning, and she speculated that a decision could come within the next 6 or 7 days. Now, what Governor Andy Beshear has said is that regardless of the decision, is that he will support Harris and do whatever he can to ensure that she will be elected this November.
All right, Shauna Mizell for us with Governor Andy Beshear. Thank you, Shauna. Appreciate it, as always. All right, at a conservative Christian event on Friday, former President Donald Trump urged Christians to vote in November, telling them they wouldn't have to do it again if he's reelected to the White House. Listen to this.
Get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote.
CBS News campaign reporter Torian Small joins me now for more. So, Torian, has the Trump campaign clarified what the former president meant when he told supporters at a rally that they would not have to vote again in 4 years?
Well, Vlad, as you know, I've been following Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance for some time now. I was with him in Minnesota this past weekend and asked him directly, what did the former president mean when he said those words? You won't have to do it again. This is the only election as he urged Christians to go out and vote. And he said, look, this is a misconception, a perversion of the former president's words. In his mind, what he believes the president was trying to say there was that this is the most important election. In order to quell concerns about the election integrity or the integrity of our elections that many Republicans have, they have to go out and support the former president this time around. If he is elected, they believe that those Republicans' concerns about election integrity, voter fraud will be erased.
Yeah, well, J.D. Vance, as you know, Tori, can say that he thinks the former president meant whatever he thinks he meant, but we heard what he said, which is he told voters they wouldn't have to vote again in 4 years. So that has a lot of people scratching their heads this morning, and I suspect that the questions will continue, not just to the Trump campaign, but to the former president himself, should he ever take some questions from reporters. Meanwhile, speaking of J.D. Vance, the Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, called him one of the best things he's ever done for Democrats. What does that mean? What is Chuck Schumer signaling? And have you heard, I know you're with the Vance camp, so you're not going to hear from them that there may be buyer's remorse from the Trump people, but you talk to your colleagues who cover the former president. What are you hearing about potentially this buyer's remorse that Trump has? Because if there is one thing that we know about Donald Trump, he does not like when you are not able to rally a crowd. He does not like when you are the center of attention for negative things that you say to the press, things that leave a lot of people scratching their heads. What are you hearing?
Well, here's the thing, Vlad. A lot of voters that I talked to ahead of these rallies, both solo rallies and joint rallies with the former president and J.D. Vance, voters are saying they don't really know much about him. It's hard to really gauge enthusiasm when you don't really know a lot about the person who's on the ticket with the guy that you're actually here to see. But a lot of voters that I also talked to say they have some concerns, some lingering concerns about previous comments that J.D. Vance has made about Donald Trump that were considered disparaging. And this is something that J.D. Vance has said on the trail, both in media gaggles, but also in stump speeches, that he's looking to clear up those things that he said before about the former president. But Vance's team, though, is responding to the idea or analysis that voters are having buyer's remorse with him. He says, look, Kamala Harris was unpopular just a year ago. These polls aren't anything to watch.
Yeah, and Torian, before you go, so the report in the New York Times this weekend, which indicated some of the things that you're talking about now, which are going to be problematic for J.D. Vance. In other words, a few years ago, he was firmly in the never Trump camp, and because of political expediency, he's now changed his tune. But you're going to always be able to go back and find things that he said that don't jive with the way that he is talking now about the former president. What did the New York Times say about recordings of J.D. Vance, for example, with regards to how he viewed the police back then?
Well, it's on track to his history of disparaging the former president. Look, the Vance campaign is saying this, that Vance has turned the page. He's seen the presidency of Donald Trump and says this is evidence for him to support him moving forward. How the Trump campaign is utilizing Vance, though, is he's the primary person out at these fundraisers, at these rallies. He's doing more rallies than Trump is doing now, which is why I'm in California right now. There's a fundraiser with tech CEOs looking to add to the war chest. And this is a huge difference from the support in Silicon Valley before. That's usually gone to Democrats. Republicans are now looking to garner that support here in a place like California.
All right, Torian for us this morning. Thank you, Torian. We appreciate you. All right, let's get back to that breaking news out of the UK, where police say a man has stabbed several people. This is happening in Southport, which is north of Liverpool. Let's take you now live to coverage from the BBC.
I'll come back to you because there are many questions I want to ask you, but I want to actually take our viewers to the scene, our correspondent Nick Garnett, who's there for us. And Nick, just start by bringing us up to date in terms of what is happening all around you.
Well, let's see if anything I've said to anybody. Okay, so this is the outer cordon on a road called Hart Street, which is in Southport, just north of Liverpool. And as you can see down the line, there's this first cordon here of police tape. There's another second one just a few meters behind me. But then right the way down the street at the far end, you'll see some lights, there's some police lights, and another set of tape. And that is near the the small business park that's down there, where this incident happened. It happened at around 11:15. There was a course going on, a yoga course for very young children, ages between years 2 and years 6, so they're primary school children, that was happening in a building down there. It was classed as a Taylor Swift event, and they were playing Taylor Swift songs to the children while they did yoga and dance when this incident happened. One person has been arrested. A number of people have been taken to hospital. And as we were just hearing then, the hospitals that they are taking the injured people to tells you about the number of injuries that there were, the level of injuries that were there, and the fact that some of those injured were undoubtedly children. They've taken children to Alderhay Children's Hospital, which is one of the best in the country, a specialist unit. It's used to dealing with events and tragedies such as this. What's interesting is as your correspondent said before, the fact that Alderhay is further away from here than the nearest hospital. There's a hospital just a few miles down the road in Ormskirk, which has a children's A&E unit and is used to treating children who are injured there. The fact they did not take them there, and the fact that they've moved them across Liverpool to Alderhay, which is in the south of Liverpool itself, we're in the north at the moment, shows you just how serious this incident is and how the emergency services are dealing with it. I came past a school about a quarter of a mile away, which is being used by the police and the emergency services as their headquarters. I've never seen so many vehicles. There were police vehicles, there were fire engines, there were ambulances there as well. Northwest Ambulance Service says they've brought at least 13 ambulances here. The police helicopter, the emergency helicopter for the ambulance services, was also used to ferry injured people to hospital as well. Now, as I say, the situation is, as we know, that one person has been arrested, that a knife was recovered, or a sharp-bladed instrument. We don't particularly know that it was a knife at this point, but the police are saying that there is no threat to the wider area. However, that's of no comfort to anyone who lives around here. I've spoken to people here who are petrified about what's happened. I spoke to a nurse who said that she came down after her daughter heard what she described as a blood-curdling scream. And text messages came through to her phone. She realized something was coming on, and she ran from work to come back to the street where she lives in. This is an area, a quiet residential area, about 5 minutes away from the main part of Southport. So she came back and worked out what was happening and saw the distress amongst local people here. And she's a therapy nurse, and she's been helping people who were injured to come here and to be looked after, and for her to triage them in effect and then pass them on to the emergency services if they needed more help. Spoke to another lady who lives around the corner who described this area for me.
All right, if you are just joining us here at CBS News 24/7, what you have been listening to is a correspondent from our partners at the BBC News in the UK who is reporting from Southport, which is just north of Liverpool, where if you heard what the correspondent was saying, which is that there has been a stabbing, and police are calling it a major incident. And as I was listening to that correspondent there, the details of what has unfolded were potentially horrific. This was apparently happening at a location where young children were participating in a children's yoga session, where then this incident, this reported stabbing, took place. And what's horrific about what that correspondent was saying is where the victims of this stabbing were taken. And here you have the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom here already putting out a statement on social media. Horrendous and deeply shocking news emerging from Southport. My thoughts are with all of those affected. I want to thank the police and the emergency services for their swift response. I'm being updated as the situation develops. So it's quite unusual to have the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom putting out a statement this quickly after an incident like this, which again suggests how serious this potentially is. That correspondent there from the BBC was saying, based on where some of the victims of the stabbing have been taken, children's hospitals that are prepared to deal with severe trauma, that does give you an indication of how horrific and how potentially bad this incident was. So we don't have any details yet on the ages of the victims or who they are. We don't even have any details on the suspect, other than the police have indicated that they've recovered the instrument that was used in the stabbing and that the suspect has been arrested. So we're going to stay on top of this. This is why you come to us, because we have this relationship with the BBC. They are on the ground there. We also have our correspondent Ian Lee, who's reporting from our London bureau. So we get more information as soon as we get it here. We'll share it with you. Stay with us. This is CBS News 24/7. Right now, hurricane watchers are monitoring a tropical disturbance in the Atlantic. The National Hurricane Center says the system is currently located east of a group of islands in the Caribbean Sea. They say environmental conditions are increasing the chances of the system developing into a tropical depression around midweek. The latest outlook projects it could head in the general direction of Florida or the southeast coast. So let's bring in CBS News meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another look at the national forecast. Grant, not looking good.
Well, look, it's that time of year where the Saharan dust, which has been out over the tropical Atlantic, has really been prolific, limiting a lot of this tropical development. We had a lot of activity back in June and July, but now is the time of year that we really have to start keeping an eye on the tropics, not just in the Atlantic, but closer to home as well. Let me take a closer look at this forecast that we're keeping an eye on out in the Atlantic. Now, look, it's not much, I'll admit. I mean, there's only about a 50% chance of this system actually developing into a tropical system, but some of our forecast models have been pretty consistent with it doing that. It's just this little disturbance out in the middle of the Atlantic, tracking to the west-northwest. Now, right now, a 50% chance that it could develop into either a tropical depression or a tropical storm as it moves into that orange hashed area, as it moves across the Hispaniola up into the Bahamas, Cuba. But certainly the southeastern United States will have to keep a close eye on this system if it develops. So that'll be something to keep a close eye on. Meanwhile, today, speaking of heating up, big heat building for a multi-day heat wave across the Central Plains, Vlad. Feels like temperatures over the next several days will be between 100 to 110, anywhere from Texas to Nebraska. Back to you.
Grant, we say it every time, right? I know these look hot. It looks hot. But I'd much rather this than you coming to me and saying it's going to be 25 below across the city. You know, not happy. I like this much better. Thanks, Grant.
Yeah. It's relentless, though, still. Yeah, for sure.
It is. It is indeed. All right. Thanks, brother. We're tracking the latest reaction from lawmakers to President Biden's proposed Supreme Court report. We're going to have a lot more on that. Streaming CBS News 24/7. It is Disability Pride Month, marking the July signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. CBS News New York's Cindy Hsu introduces us to an artist celebrating through dance.
Jerron Herman is a modern dancer who's performed all over the world. His latest project, in partnership with the Abrams Art Center, is a 45-minute performance called Vitruvian Man, based off the famous drawing by Leonardo da Vinci.
I wanted to insert my black male disabled identity into this really classical image and think about how I still fit in.
Herman was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at 3 months old and never imagined he could become a dancer.
I definitely thought that my CP would have been a barrier to dancing. I was flat out told that dreams of being a performer were flat or wouldn't happen.
So Herman didn't start dancing until he was 20 years old, when a dance company asked him to join. Before that, he wrote for theater. Now he dances every day. He says Disability Pride Month is a time to celebrate the progress made in disability rights, but it's also a time to get loud about the many changes still needed.
and there's still so many structural things that literally physical barriers to entry for people with disabilities.
Herman is hopeful about the future and says there are many ways everyone can celebrate Disability Pride Month.
I would say Google history about disability lives, disabled lives. Crip Camp is a documentary that was very lauded last year. Go see work by disabled folks who say they're disabled in their titles, in their bios. Hey, think about a world that is more accessible.
In New York City, Cindy Hsu, CBS New York.
All right, thanks for joining us. An encore of CBS Mornings is coming up next. This is CBS News 24/7.